Welcome, everybody. Marc David here, founder of the Institute for the Psychology of Eating. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing a colleague of mine, James Colquhoun. Welcome, James. Good to see you here.
Hey, Mark. It's great to be here and to connect again. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it has been. Let me just brag on you for a couple of moments. So sure. James Colquhoun is the co-founder of Food Matters. It's a very popular and well-loved global online wellness hub. It focuses on nutrition, health, personal transformation. James is also a filmmaker. He's created the Transcendence docuseries and the movies Hungry for Change and Food Matters. He's also the founder of the popular streaming channel FMTV. And I just want to dive in and just share what you're up to with our world here. And because you do so many interesting things. And the first time I found out about Food Matters and was poking around your website, I thought, wow, this is so good. So first of all, how did you get into this line of work? Like, did you wake up one morning and said, I'm going to create an online wellness and food portal?
No. And I think most of the people in this space maybe didn't start out that way. But my journey into nutrition and bringing a lot of these films and work to the world was really around personal tragedy. My father was quite unwell. He went through a midlife type crisis, which I think many people do in that sort of 40 to 50 age group. And he was burnt out, stressed out, wasn't fully aligned with the work he was doing. And on top of that, he was eating poorly. And this resulted in him suffering from fatigue, anxiety, depression, and he did what any good, upstanding citizen in the community does, and they go to their doctor. And he went to his doctor and he got prescribed multiple different medications, and he ended up on a cocktail of 6 different medications, mostly pretty intense psychotropic drugs. And this ended up in a pretty dark sort of spiral for him, where he was, coming up 5 years by the end of it, mostly bedridden, unable to work, and really just flawed. And that, in a way, what was inspiring for me from a sort of, it was a sad situation, but it was something that we wanted to get to the bottom of. My partner and I, Laurentine, at the time we were a little bit upset that there was no solutions. The medical profession kept saying, well, we don't know exactly how to get rid of this, but if we try this cocktail of medications, maybe it will work. And at the time, Laurentine and I had been to some seminars and events, and then got inspired about the power of nutrition and started reading some books, and then watching some early documentaries. And we were starting to send books to my father. We're like, hey, you got to read this book, and it's a 300-page book on natural healing, and he's like, not interested. Then the next thing, we would send him another book, which was a little bit more narrative driven, but with some good data in there. I remember one of the ones we sent him was Diet for a New America, one of John Robbins' first books, seminal piece. And he didn't read it, but my mum read it. So we got somewhere in there. And then we thought, well, how can we get through to him? If this isn't working, how can we get through to him? And we just had this idea to interview some of the experts we'd been studying. We formalized our knowledge by studying nutrition online, and we received a certification as a nutrition consultant. And we're like, wow, we've got a little bit of confidence now. We know some of the core ideas behind healing the body, using nutrition, using natural foods. And how do we get this through to my dad? That was the next most important step. And the idea was, let's interview some experts that we'd been studying and in a way turn it into a film. But initially it was just the interviews, and let's, lob up on his doorstep and sit him down in front of the TV and start playing these interviews from experts that he might take seriously, because they were doctors, they were researchers, they were leading experts in this space. And, ultimately it worked. He got the message. I think maybe because we'd spent most of our life savings doing the interviews, that he took us a little more seriously. But additionally, it was that power of authority, and he'd given the authority to his doctor to prescribe the medication, and he almost needed another level of authority to persuade him to try a different path. And that's where the interviews and the sort of format of the film and this idea originally came from. And ultimately the result was a resounding success in a matter of weeks, but then ultimately months. It was about 3 months. He was off all of his medications. He lost 50 pounds. He was back to normal almost, and running, and he loved running. He wasn't able to do it for years, and he was running again 3 times a week, and sleeping through the night, and not having panic attacks or depressive thoughts or even suicidal thoughts. And that was a massive shift. And then we thought, well, if we can get my dad back on track, how many other people are there in the world that are in this situation? Like my mother with a partner that's sick, or, family members that have a sick family member that they'd love to convince about the power of nutrition to heal. And, statistically, as humans, we suffer, you know what I mean? And it's chronic illness, or it's a niggling digestive issue, on that entire spectrum. There is so much that we can do from a nutrition perspective, and there's just quite a large knowledge gap, as you're aware of with the work you do as well. And we've been seeking to close that knowledge gap over the past 15 years and continue to do so.
I love this story because oftentimes, not always, oftentimes we get into the health field, true because of personal tragedy, but usually my own personal tragedy, like my health issue, my cancer, my diabetes. And here for you, it was a loved one, and it was your parent, and you just dove right in. How old were you when that process started?
Yeah, I was in my, I would say mid-20s. So quite young. And I remember just developing an enormous passion for nutrition, simply because it was something that was never a world that was never open to me. I just allowed nutrition to be, the ideas about what nutrition should be, to be fed to me, pardon the pun, by the culture, by the environment, by governments, by food lobbyists. And they're the people that give you the food pyramid and put the ticks on the products that you buy in the stores, or the star ratings. And I guess in so many ways, as humans, we hand over our power to corporations in this modern world to do the thinking for us. And I think that thinking clearly, independently, is a revolutionary act. And it was something that I realized I wasn't doing. And it was a bit of a wake-up call for me personally as well. And that started to sort of stoke this fire inside of me to want to get to the bottom of it. Like, why was it that, intravenous vitamin C wasn't used as like a first port of call for cancer patients? Or why was it that, Hippocrates had these hospitals on the islands of Kos in Greece, and there was different stages of the hospital. And one of the stages was they clean you up first, like inside and out, before you go in. You do a detox. Why are we not like clearing people out before they go in for surgery? And then I'd hear things from like Professor Ian Brighthurst, and he's like, look, when you go into surgery or for a treatment, they often put a saline solution in you. And we have data now that if we put zinc into that saline solution, so you're getting an infusion of zinc, your chance of having an infection after your surgery drops dramatically. Now, this is a low cost, very effective treatment protocol, and yet nobody's doing it. So I just started asking these questions. Why are we not using nutrition, detoxification, nutrients as part of the protocols of interacting with medicine and healing? And then, Mark, it became clear, follow the dollars. As Andrew Saul says in Food Matters, good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. And that's when it started to get a little bit, cue the dramatic music, much more investigative type journalism, as opposed to, hey, this is how to use nutrition to heal. Because what we discovered was the reason why you don't have access to this knowledge is simply because it doesn't fit the corporate profit narrative of these huge multinational companies that are profiting essentially from your illness. And in some way, the medications that where we have in the modern world save lives and help us, but there's many drugs that are now targeted at diseases of lifestyle, which is middle to upper class domesticated humans in the developed West that have these diseases because of how they eat, drink, think, and live. And they're the perfect target market for somebody to take that drug until the day they die. And that's the perfect drug from the perspective of a drug company. One that helps you feel better, but never really cures you and you need to stay on it. I mean, that's the ultimate product. And, if you really think through that profit motive and with that lens, you start to see things differently. And you would start to, as Dr. Dan Rogers would say, you'd start to think about using drugs as a crutch, something that you use short term, and then you don't stay on crutches once your leg's healed. You throw them out. And I think that we've become a nation that's addicted to long-term use of medication. And it's a very good thing for the pharmaceutical companies and a very bad thing for human health, in my opinion.
Well, it's so difficult because we are born into that model, and it's pervasive. It's the water that we're swimming in. It's the air that we're breathing. And from a young age, you want to believe that what you're being taught is correct. So when I go to school and they tell me, here's what you eat and here's what you don't eat, then I want to believe that the bacon and the Pop-Tarts and the Velveeta cheese is good for me.
Yeah.
And that's what I believed until, for me, I was very sickly and asthmatic as a child. I almost died a handful of times in infancy. And my parents took me, and I had an undiagnosed autoimmune condition. Doctors didn't know what to do with it. And at some point, I'd heard a rumor that fruits and vegetables were good for you. I was about 5 years old, and I asked my mother to change my diet. I asked her to give me apples and peas and carrots in a can, because to my brain, that was fruits and vegetables. And she bought it. And coincidence or not, I started eating differently and my health changed. Wow. And there was that moment I remember as a child. It was so magical. I realized I had the power. And I realized I could do something. And I realized food was magic in a certain kind of way. And I realized that I was learning that adults weren't as smart as they said they were. And
that's big.
So that put me on my path. So you were 25-ish when this was going down. So you're with your then partner, she's your wife, Laurentine. How did that coupling happen as you're kind of getting into this new career? It seemed like you both sort of merged into that together.
Yeah, it was. Look, it was a confluence of a number of different things, Mark. But one was that there was a few things. I mean, we were working together. We were overseas at the time. We studied nutrition together. We sort of built this passion together at the same time because we were equally shocked and interested. And then I remember we saw a movie called The Secret. Many people listening to this have probably seen The Secret movie. And, it was really well done and it was enthralling. It was exciting. It was like personal development and visualization and affirmations all wrapped into one. And, we were also studying nutrition and personal development. Like, why do we do what we do? If we know better, why is it that people do what they do? And then I think seeing The Secret was hugely inspirational because it gave us this spark of like, wow, we could potentially do a film like this, but in the health space. And that was a little window that got opened in our minds in terms of the possibility. And I guess we didn't let that window close. We stuck with it despite the odds that were stacked against us. We had no filmmaking experience. We had little to no money. We had no contacts. We had no equipment. We basically were the least likely people to pull it off, but we had a passion and we just executed on that passion. And it was a little bit crazy, but ultimately it just turned out to be divine timing. I mean, there was no films really on this topic at that time. And that ultimately led to the film getting some pretty unique exposure. I mean, Netflix picked it up and then it was translated into multiple languages, and we were touring Japan and France and Europe. And then there was free screenings that were being held all around the world. And it was really a very exciting time and really propelled us onto this path of the last 15 years of creating films and supporting the sort of Food Matters ecosystem and infrastructure online. And now, I pinched myself, with I'm having a podcast with you, and then I'm getting emails from the founder of, the CEO of Hay House. And then I'm on the board of Gaia, and we built a TV channel, and there's all these things that I literally, Mark, would have never ever imagined possible. And I think in reflection, it was listening to a voice, it was listening to a calling, it was listening to an insight. And then in a way, I guess in reflection of now learning more about Joseph Campbell's work, it was also answering that call, picking up the phone and being like, hello, okay, make a film. Okay, hell yes, let's do it, And so I think that and I think everybody receives those calls. Some people answer them, some people hang up, and that's okay, different stage of time of life. But I think that's taught me to answer the call when I get the call now and tap in a little bit more to that intuitive inner voice that, is there for all of us. Often it's like a nagging voice, but every now and then there's this insight that comes, and I've just learned to listen a little bit more and tune into that. And it's been a exciting journey and continues to challenge and excite me every day to this day now.
Well, so beautifully put, answering that call and listening to that voice, despite all the odds being stacked against you. So that first film was Food Matters.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, that was such an amazing That was such an amazing creation, especially as you said at the time, there really wasn't anything else like it out there. Mm. And so the second film that came out, that was Hungry for Change.
Correct. Yeah.
What was the time frame between those two documentaries?
It was actually 4 years, which was a little bit too long, Mark, but it took us time to just figure out how to get Food Matters out. I think once we made the film, there was this, we had to take off the filmmaker hat and put on the distribution hat. Like, how do we get this to people? And we were just really testing a lot of different strategies and really a little bit on ground zero when it comes to sort of DIY distribution, which was an emerging idea in the film world, that you didn't have to go to festivals. You didn't have to have a distributor. You could actually, do a fair bit of your own distribution. And that was a new idea. And we were sort of forging new concepts that ultimately resulted in me speaking at like film festivals and filmmaker conferences. And then, so that took a little bit of extra time. And then we got on the road again and filmed for Hunger for Change. And this was, the idea for this came because when people would see my father, like my family members and his family members, and he'd go to family reunions and they knew that he was sick because it was known. And then they saw this younger looking, healthier looking, thinner looking, more vibrant looking version of him. And they're like, hang on, wait, you were actually really sick and now you look really good. Like, what happened? And they were not interested in how he got off his medications, or they were just interested in how he lost the weight and how he looked so good. And it was, that was a bit of a wake up call for us, because I was expecting people to say, how many grams of vitamin C and B3 niacin did it take for you to come off your antidepressants and your tranquilizers and, getting off your psychotropic medications? And no, they were just like, you look great. What did you do? And I think what it made me realize is that there's a lot of people that want to look good and feel good. And I think that's a natural thing to desire as a human. And it's not a natural, in the modern world at least, it's not a natural thing. We see a lot of obesity, and we see a lot of tiredness, a lot of fatigue, a lot of, people not being very vibrant. And, there's been some photos shared on the internet recently with a picture of people on the beach, I think in the 1970s, and they're in their swimwear and they're lean, and everybody looks really great and quite fit and healthy. And then there's a picture of, people on the beach today, and it's a vastly different landscape. There is a lot more obesity, and there's a lot more just, people that don't look like they're thriving. We've really, and if you look at the statistics, Mark, it's pretty horrific. And then I started to think, okay, well then people go and do a diet, but then diets have been very popular since the 80s. And so something's not working. And then we started to look into the diet industry and what's being perpetuated in the diet industry and these weight loss products, and how none of it is really addressing the underlying causes. And so we really wanted to create a little bit of an expose on diet and weight loss and transformation. And that became the Hungry for Change documentary. I think the title says it. I think people are hungry for change, yet they're just looking in the wrong place. And we wanted to bring a holistic approach to weight loss.
So, James, you're based in Australia, correct?
Yes.
And it's interesting. I've always observed that it seems like Australia, when compared to the United States, has been like a little bit behind in the health curve, which I find fascinating, because you and Laurentine were really way ahead of the curve, I think, for globally when it came to really looking at these issues and, really trying to place them in the public eye in the biggest way possible. So I just want to congratulate you on just having that vision and being able to follow through with it in a powerful way. And, life just kind of showed you that the calling was correct. It wasn't a wrong number by any stretch of the imagination. So I've also noticed that you have a docuseries called Transcendence, and that seems to be taking a slight turn away from the food and diet universe. Can you share a little about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, as the story evolves, and so did my parents, the next step of their journey was, as they transformed their body, they started to move into transforming their mind and their spirit. And they became more interested in things like meditation and mantra and chanting. And they started to hang out with different people. And, I really got to see that, eating healthy has side effects that are positive, Mark. They changed their friend group, they changed what their habits were. And, even as religious people growing up, and they were open to sort of Eastern philosophy and meditation and these sort of practices, these mind-body practices. And I'd always sort of had a side interest in, because when you study nutrition, you're studying transformation and health. And then you come across studies where people didn't change what they eat, they changed their mind and they had transformation. And this is, of course, with the work that you do for many years as well, you're familiar with this and how closely how we think and what we eat tie together, whether it's from a simple thing as like, if I ask somebody, what is the most powerful memories you have about food? And people would be like, oh, Thanksgiving or July 4 or hot dogs or turkey or something, right? But there's emotions attached to it, right? And so food is an emotional thing. And then you have the actual power of our thoughts and our beliefs and how this impacts our body. And I'd had increasing interest in people like the work of people like Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza. And that then sort of became something that we wanted to go deeper into and hence created this Transcendence series. There was a little bit in food on there. And I think the first episode, we talk a lot about gluten and modern wheat, because I think it's one of the silent triggers that is causing a lot of gut issues, bloating, gas, indigestion, and ultimately resulting in leaky gut and autoimmune conditions. So I think that, people think, oh, I'm going to go eat a plant-based diet. And look, it's good to get off toxic, poorly raised animal products, but to go on to a very heavily processed, refined, modern wheat-based diet is not altogether the best next step. And so really wanted to awaken people to some of that insight and then move more on into the mind-body component. And that ultimately resulted in then 2 seasons of that Transcendence series, so 10 episodes. And we end up going deep into like childhood trauma and, mind-body practices and purpose and having a sense of purpose in your life and following that purpose, and incredible stories from people like Wim Hof and John Robbins and John Gabriel and Jim Quick and, Dispenza and Lipton and just the whole raft of, Ken Robinson and Marie Forleo and Gabby Bernstein, people that I, were on my dream list to interview. And I think one of the great sort of joys of what I do is that I get to go and hang out with my, my dream experts and ask them questions. And then that's like a really amazing opportunity. So that's ultimately how those films came about, those 2 seasons.
I love how you made the connection. It's that how, there's this sort of natural progression when you have an experience of transformation through nutrition. I change how I eat, my body transforms, my health transforms. It's just that train of transformation wants to keep on going. And it naturally leads to, well, wait a second, my mind is clearer. I'm just more of a vessel. I'm more open. I'm more of a channel. And all of a sudden, I'm interested in expansion. I'm interested in understanding my mind. I'm interested in understanding the universe. And, when I first started getting exposed, even to Chinese medicine, and, Chinese 5-element theory from, in my teens, I quickly noticed that, it's a whole worldview that they're inviting you into when they're talking about Chinese medicine and acupuncture and meridians and the 5 elements. It's not just the body. It's not just, here are the foods. It's all about our place on the earth, our place in the cosmos. Ayurveda is the same thing. It's their whole food theory sits within a larger theory of the science of life and the science of the universe, which it's just all so beautifully connected. It's similar thing happened for my dad. He was just, typical American, raised on a typical American diet, and didn't have a very healthy lifestyle. He got brain cancer when he was 54. Doctors gave him 2 months to live. It was a huge brain tumor, grade 4, grade 5 astrocytoma, the size of a fist inside his brain. And all of a sudden he became open to alternative possibilities. And we put him, I helped him choose like a natural diet that was, more macrobiotic leaning at the time. And he just went on this amazing healing journey. And in less than a year, completely shrunk and disappeared his tumor. which
Whoa.
doctors were blown away. He ended up living 4 years. By year 3 or so, the tumor came back.
Uh-huh.
I think there was a strange place for him where he didn't necessarily make that next leap. I think he was so expecting to die that when he realized he was going to live, he had his whole life in front of him. Like, oh my God, who am I? I think that was a very intense question for him.
Oh yeah. The identity question, right? The identity challenge. Like, who am I? Why am I here? What am I even doing? Yeah. My dad came up with that, quite confronting. Yeah.
And I find that happens a lot in the nutrition universe. We can easily get caught up in. I love nutrition. I love playing with nutrition, playing with new foods, new ideas, new ways of eating. And what I've noticed is people can get stuck in that place where they get healthy, they lose weight, they have more energy, and it can become very, how do I want to say, it can become a little bit about vanity, where, okay, I'm looking good, I'm fit, I'm healthy, I'm working out. And I just want to say, okay, well, what are you going to do with all that health? What are you going to do with all that energy? Like, do something. Let's make the world a better place now, instead of just looking younger and younger or better, whatever it is from there. People end up just wanting to find even more longevity. And well, okay, that's good, but what are you going to do with a long life?
Yeah. I think that's what you're talking about, Mark, is this transition from me to we. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people get stuck in ego, in self-identification. And I think nutrition can be a path to crack you open into this broader understanding that the Vedic tradition, like you mentioned, Ayurveda and Vedic philosophy, and even other Eastern philosophies speak about this unity consciousness, that we're all one. And I think sometimes in the West, we get very pigeonholed into this idea that it's all about me, and that I just have to be healthy and young, and I have to save a lot of money, and I have to have this big 401k or this big retirement home. And it's a very selfish idea. Whereas if you look at more of a richer Eastern type philosophical approach to life, it's very much about service, community, purpose, giving back. And I find that the people I've interviewed that have tapped into that energy are able to achieve a greater sense of peace and harmony and unity with life, that often people of the developed sort of corporatocracy type ideology struggle to grasp, because they're built in this, like, building up their own mound, their own hill before they die. And yeah, it's a very different idea to expand to discovering a richer purpose in service. And that's something that I think we all get faced with at some point in time, either with a chronic illness or with a midlife crisis or with the loss of a loved one. It's something that will eventually come to most people, or through insight. And yeah, it's very interesting to think about that too.
So you have a video blog series that I wasn't aware of. I just learned about it today. It's called Wild and Free. And I read a little bit about it, but I would love for you to share with us, what is it? What are you documenting?
Sure. Well, pre-COVID, which is now like an official terminology for describing a period of time in the human universe. Laurentine, my partner, she actually grew up on a tropical island in the Pacific when she was younger, and we also adopted a son into our family, and he was from a remote island. And we wanted to move to Vanuatu, which is this island nation in the Pacific, to connect into just more of an indigenous, simple way of living, and reconnect to and show our kids more of what it's like to live just connected to the land and natural ways of living. And so we moved to this country, and started to learn a lot about how indigenous people live on planet Earth. And there's still many people around the world that live in a simple subsistence style way. And we've since been living there most of the time since pre-COVID, and we were there during COVID as well. And it was one of the rare places in the world that had 0 cases of COVID through until just early in 2022 even. So, I mean, for a year and a half or so, there was no cases. And look, we decided to do this small little series on YouTube just to document some of what we were learning. And it was really a lot of fun, to do this. And, we haven't shot anything more since because it's been, just more difficult to get people to film and to travel back and forth. But, the series, the videos that we shot were super fun. And, if I had to think about what some of the biggest takeaways were, I was actually with some of the indigenous Niva and Vanuatu people here in Australia just recently. And they were here. They often come to Australia and New Zealand to help work on some of the farms here, like picking fruit, things like that. Maybe a little bit like some of the immigrant workers in Southern California. And I speak the language there now, which is a language called Bishlama. And I needed some help with the project. So I went around to where they were all living, and I found 3 of these guys that were really cool. And then they came and helped me at the house. And I took them for a little drive around, and we went up to this lookout. And one of the boys was like, he had a really interesting question for me. He's like, James, why do you not have elders and ancestors here that you sit with around the fire and talk about, life, culture, meaning, existence? Why don't you have that? And I'm like, yeah, it's funny. We don't have that because I know in their culture, they have chiefs, they have, little chiefs, big chiefs. They have these elders or abus as they call them. And they have storian, which is like story time. And they sit and they talk and they philosophize about life and food and culture and religion and how to behave. And there's all these, ways that they do it. And I'm like, yeah, we sort of just have like governments and councils and we don't really sit with indigenous people. And they sat there and then they're like, yeah, it's funny. In the West, you have to pay for everything, don't you? You have to pay for your house. You have to pay for your food. You have to pay for your car, because there they get given a piece of land, and to build a house, you basically plant a garden and you feed people and they come and help out. Mm-hmm. And so there's, it's really interesting. So they don't really have to pay for anything. And if your food and your community and your shelter is provided free, then that's basically what we spend our time working in the West for. And so, of course, we've afforded ourselves many more luxuries in the West, but at what cost, I would say, Mark. And then they were sort of thinking about the fact that we didn't have abus and that we have to, or these elders, and we have to pay for everything, and we work to pay for everything. And they're thinking about it, and they're like, yeah, that's your problem. Yeah. And it sort of is the problem. And so while the modern world and the modern ideals of living have given us so much, security, safety, comfort, it's come at a great cost. Our health suffers, our psychology suffers, where we have less community, we have less support. So there's more depression, there's more anxiety, there's more suicide. I mean, the WHO have warned us that this is the looming health crisis that's on the horizon, is mental health issues. And we've seen COVID awaken that sleeping giant, and it's a real thing. And if I compare more indigenous ways of living and I look at modern ways of living, it's quite clear to see, in my experience of living between these two worlds, why it is that we have this sense of disconnection and suffering. And I guess that's something we can seek to repair, but it will take some work.
Yeah, what a powerful experience. Good for you for creating that for your family and really immersing yourself. And I often think that how in the United States, it's so abundantly clear. Since I was young, I could see that the elderly were considered more disposable. And it was always scary to me to think in that way. I'm lucky to have grown up in a family where we valued our grandparents tremendously, and they were respected and they were listened to. And I've heard all the stories from my grandparents. So I feel very fortunate in that way. I'm thinking of, there was a famous sort of poet, philosopher, Robert Bly, and he wrote a book called The Sibling Society. And he basically said, American society, it's a bunch of siblings. It's a bunch of brothers and sisters running around, kind of arguing with each other. There's no parents. There's no elders.
Wow.
So we call that the Sibling Society. It's as if a bunch of kids are raising each other. And what that would look like. And that really struck me. And it's, I think other words to put on this is that, in the West, we have access to so much information. Like you and I can spend the rest of our lives Googling anything and have enough information, but we don't have easy access to wisdom. Information, yes. Wisdom that's meaningful, that can change your life or deepen you or help heal you or help you grow. Harder to find.
I would tend to agree. Yeah.
So I want to ask you a series of quick questions, 1 to 2 sentence answers for you. Someone who inspires you and why?
Michael Singer, author of The Surrender Experiment, because he has this statement that says everything will be okay as soon as you're okay with everything. And I think it's a beautiful motto for understanding that life is going to go as planned sometimes, and life is not going to go as planned sometimes. And both are okay and both are perfect. And I love this philosophical approach. So yeah, Michael Singer.
Beautiful. A health practice or technique that you personally love?
Cold water exposure. I love it and hate it. But it's something that I worked with Wim Hof one-on-one, and I used to hate the cold, and he taught me to love the cold. And, right now it's winter in Australia. It's quite cold. And I went into my pool, which is very cold, this morning, and I did cold water exposure, and it just makes me feel alive. And I can't get out of a hot shower or a hot bath without cold now. I need to have the cold on me to just stimulate that. So that's a practice that's stuck with me, and I love it.
Amen. All right. A place on your bucket list that you'd like to visit?
Oh, that I'd like to visit. Well, I'm really fortunate to have visited so many places, Mark. I mean, I think my travel itineraries have been pretty wild over the last 15 years. Where I have not yet visited that I would like to visit. Machu Picchu.
All right.
Yeah.
A tip you can offer when it comes to raising healthy children?
Don't impose your food upbringing on the children unless it was incredibly healthy. But ultimately, one of the things that I found very profound that we did with Hugo, our son, was that we would put out in front of him from a very young age, from the first solid foods that he had, we would put a selection of different foods and allow him to choose. So we would put apples, broccoli, cod liver oil, fish eggs, sardines, pumpkin, sweet potato, and just put this all out and be like, you eat what you feel intuitively inspired to eat. And oddly enough, he became quite addicted to cod liver oil. So look, he's a smart kid. He's got a very expanded sense of understanding the world. And maybe we were able to fuel his brain in a way that most kids don't if they were stuck on eating cereal-based breakfasts. So look, I would say put a big selection of food out for your children from a very young age, from the first age, and you will find that their expansive capability to eat a lot of different types of foods is very powerful.
Great tip. One more, a tip you can offer or some wisdom when it comes to having a healthy relationship with your significant other.
Focus on managing your own state. And look, significant others, people that you work closely with, are always going to trigger you in the most unique ways. And being able to manage your own state, either through meditation practice, exercise, good nutrition, breath work, to be centered and grounded and strong and coming from a place of love, respect, and being able to respond and not react, can be one of the most powerful ways that you can support and harbor healthy relationships, in my opinion.
Well said, my friend. How do we find you and Laurentine? How do we learn more about your work and anything that you want to especially point us to?
Sure. I mean, Food Matters on social media or foodmatters.com is the home. But really, one of the things that I really encourage a lot of people to do is to try eliminating one food group from their diet. And the one food that I'm really passionate about helping people to eliminate is gluten. And so we've set up a free online challenge at getoffthegluten.com. And if people go to getoffthegluten.com and they put their name and email address, we'll send them 21 days of recipes, daily tips, plans, support, a private group, all this information to help people go through that challenge and see how great they can feel. And I think that eliminating that one food group and as a side product, sort of upgrading your overall diet a little bit, step by step, is a very simple way to focus on one thing that can have a big impact and a big positive result in people's lives. And I just find that a lot of what I'm being presented in terms of problems that people are suffering is a lot to do with indigestion, gut issues, leaky gut, autoimmune conditions, skin conditions, brain fog, weight gain. And this can really be traced back to the gut, and the gut can be inflamed a multitude of different or a myriad of ways. And gluten is a key. Gluten from modern wheat, processed refined wheat, is a key issue. So getting people to eliminate that, I've been able to see thousands of people have incredible results just by focusing on that one thing. And I think people like to just have one thing to focus on. Yes. And so, getoffthegluten.com is a great place where people can go and check that out. And we've also got a new recipe book out with Hay House called the Food Matters Cookbook, which is available on Amazon and all great places. And I think with the cookbook and the getoffthegluten.com online challenge, I think those two things together are a great place for people to take action and get in the kitchen, which is ultimately the center of their revolution and transformation, is what happens in that kitchen, on a daily basis.
James, I'm so glad we got to spend time together. I'm so glad you followed your calling. And I just so appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. And really, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Mark. It's been great chatting again since our last conversations, and love what you do as well, and grateful to be on this journey together of helping people transform their lives and health. Thank you.
Amen to that. Thank you, my friend. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Take care.
Hey friends, we're so happy that you've joined us for another episode of The Psychology of Eating with Marc David. Are you loving these episodes? Then simply subscribe and you'll never miss an episode again. We'd also love it if you'd leave us a comment below so we can hear more about your own journey with food and body. And if you're curious about what we offer at the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, including our internationally acclaimed coach certification training that's rooted in dynamic eating psychology and mind-body nutrition, please head on over to our website, psychologyofeating.com. Until next time, take care, and remember, having the body you want starts with loving the body you have